Unions are the single most important factor in the raising of the workers' living standard. It is almost to the interest of an employer to break the law. Biden was a terrible publicist for his own work.
I am joined by Bill Fletcher Jr., labor activist and author, who I want to first start by thanking for joining us for now the third time, I believe.
Brandon, it's really great, and I'll come on a fourth time if you want.
And we would love to have you a fourth time. So this time, our third time, we want to talk about the importance of organizing under an anti-labor president like Trump and the troubles that it may bring and how unions can overcome this. But I do want to start by just laying out the importance of why labor movements matter so people understand when we're talking about it and maybe some of the benefits we've seen. So could you just explain why labor movements, why unions are important?
Unions are the single most important factor in the raising of the workers' living standard. This is something that became very evident in the 1930s in the midst of the Depression and has been true ever since. And when unions are strong, it has an impact on the living standard even of non-union workers. So when unions are strong, you'll find that non-union companies will often take strong efforts as a way of actually discouraging unions by raising their standards to be comparable to that of unionized workers. So unions are incredible for that, but they also offer something that workers that are not unionized have no right to, which is called the just cause provision termination. In every union contract that I've ever seen, there's a provision that basically says that before someone is terminated, there has to be just cause. So there needs to be effectively steps that are taken that can be contested. In a non-union situation, Brandon, a worker can be terminated for any reason or no reason as long as their termination does not violate the law. And so what that actually ends up meaning is that most workers can be just terminated. They're just told, you're out. That's it. And even if it's a case of some sort of discrimination like race, sex, gender, that type of thing, you have to go about proving that, but you have to find a representative, like you have to get your own attorney, as opposed to if you're in a union.
Yeah, and that there's a lot of different effects you can see from that, and you can get fired as little as maybe you said the wrong thing to your boss or something, and now you're let go, and your merit, the things that these anti-union people pretend to care about, your merit then doesn't matter just because your boss doesn't like you, where unions can help protect you from that. And speaking kind of to that, the National Labor Relations Board, one of which kind of oversees these kinds of things, one of the first things Trump did was kind of render it useless, which, to be fair, was made possible by Democrats not filling a seat before Biden left and so on and so forth. Could you explain, however, why it's crucial that the NLRB will be kind of useless the next couple years and how this changes union organizing or activity?
Okay, so let's be clear that what happened at the end of the Biden administration is that two senators, Manchin, who was ostensibly a Democrat, and Sinema, who had become an independent, but had been very much of a rogue Democrat, almost from the moment that Biden was elected, chose to vote against the extension of the term of the board chair. And that made the person vulnerable. So it was two people who were nothing more than mosquitoes at midnight in August flying around the ear of the Democrats ever since Biden was elected, completely unhelpful. The National Labor Relations Board is the result of the National Labor Relations Act, passed in 1935. And the National Labor Relations Act did a couple of very important things. One is that it said that most workers, unless they were agricultural or domestic, which is very significant, were entitled to the right of self-organization. That is, that they could form or join a union. it also said something that many people will find absolutely surprising, which is that the public policy of the United States is to encourage collective bargaining. And so the National Labor Relations Board was formed as a mechanism to oversee the implementation of that act. Now, the right wing in the United States has always opposed the National Labor Relations Act and has done what it can, particularly when Republicans are in office, to weaken the National Labor Relations Board. Trump has been in opposition to the NLRA and NLRB, even when he very opportunistically will support certain unions on certain things, as he did when he supported the International Longshoremen's Association a couple of months ago. So the problem will be that there will be appointments that will be contrary to the interest of workers. And the objective of the administration will be to weaken the enforcement of the National Labor Relations Act and to allow employers to get away with bloody murder. Now, one of the things, Brandon, is really important is this. The National Labor Relations Act was already weak because it did not keep up with the changes in the way that industries function. And it didn't keep up with the mechanisms that employers often use to break or restrict unions. So the penalties for an employer violating the National Labor Relations Act are really minimal, so much so that it is almost to the interest of an employer to break the law, even if they have to pay a penalty, because by breaking the law, they can intimidate the workers and maybe eventually have to pay back wages to someone that they fired.
Kind of a tougher question, I think, one that I've been battling with, I think, since the election. So I like to ask others just to get their opinions as well. And I guess I'll say Democrats, but I guess really I just mean the left. What should the left or Democrats do, like you spoke to, getting ready for the midterm and even 2028, just moving forward to ensure that like voters and everyone outside of the labor movement understands the necessity of the labor movement and that they're the party or the side that represents it? Because in this election, like we saw how Biden did a lot of things for unions, right? There was the card check certification. He walked the picket line. There were the big strikes that he supported. I mean, there's a long list of things, but when it came to the election, like Teamsters didn't endorse Kamala, things like this, where you would think it would be almost by default with all these major labor wins. Why didn't they? Where do you think the disconnect was? And then what should the left do differently to make sure we can shore that support up so Republicans don't get the chance to do this kind of stuff again?
So I think that there were several factors that went down. One is that Biden was a terrible publicist for his own work.
Yep.
He and his administration. So all of these things that happened, particularly the first 2 years, should have really been played up and they weren't. Second thing is that he was running up against inflation. And inflation was sort of the tip of the iceberg for the economic situation working people have been facing since the 1970s. And so that was a real factor. And he and Harris needed to be speaking about that. But in order to speak about that, they essentially would have had to denounce the economic policies of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. They didn't want to do that. So that's another factor. In addition, what we need is a compelling vision for the future and a demonstrated willingness to fight. One of the things that I had not thought about, but there was a couple of commentators that pointed this out, was that there were different pieces of legislation that were passed in 2020 and 2021 to address the pandemic crisis, including the economics, that timed out in 2023. And so when the Republicans captured the Congress, they went about making sure that these things would not be extended.
Mhm.
Biden's administration, for whatever reason, didn't fight. They let these things expire. It's not clear whether they let them expire because they thought they were a lost cause or what, but that was a demoralizing thing. Sometimes you have to fight even when you know you're going to lose.
Yep.
So the final thing is we need a vision for what many people like Reverend Barber, the late Manny Marable, and others call third reconstruction. We need a vision for a progressive United States and the key elements of what that needs to look like. That's what will inspire people. It's not going to be enough to oppose the Republicans, although that's going to be very important. But that would be one thing. But the other thing that we're going to have to do is build a new voting rights movement and to take on the successful efforts at voter suppression that have taken place. There's Greg Palast
Yep.
did this major piece on voter suppression in the 2024 election, identifying that somewhere more than 3.5 million votes ended up being suppressed. And most of them were African American and Latinos, and that there were enough votes that were suppressed that could have influenced the result of the election. So we're going to have, in the coming period, a real fight around voting rights. It's vision, it's mobilization, it's resistance, and it is taking on voting rights that I think is going to be critical to defeating the right.
I completely agree with you. I think that they focused a little bit too much on, Trump bad, which you should do, point out all the bad things Trump do, but they should have focused more on like labor, the importance of labor, civic equality, even like you said, voting rights and that kind of thing. Cause that's like, when you think of the successes of the Democratic Party, like the FDRs and such, those are what you think about, like the civil rights movement, the labor gains, those kinds of things. So I definitely agree with you there. And Greg Palast, we covered it on the channel. For anyone who hasn't checked it out, he did do a really good piece that showed voter suppression might have played much bigger role than even a lot of Democrats are talking
Right.
about in the mainstream. So yeah, I appreciate you again taking some time to speak about labor with us. We'll be sure to get you back on soon enough, I'm sure, for the fourth interview. And I hope you
All
enjoy
right.
the rest of your day.
All right, man. You take care. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir. See ya.